Hi everyone. Thanks for joining the Sales Summit. Really excited to have you guys here for the systems portion of the webinar series. And this is eliminating non-selling time for top SDR teams. So my name is Taft. I'm the Global Director of Sales Development for Smart Recruiters. So for a bit of context, Smart Recruiters is an ATS or applicant tracking system. So in short, we are the software that companies' internal recruiting teams use to find and hire great talent. So I'm happy to share more about what we do, what I'm presenting here today, and anything else you'd like to know. Feel free to reach out to me. My email address is on the screen here, t.love@smartrecruiters.com. So let's dive right in and talk about the topics we're going to cover today. So the first is, what is the biggest problem SDR teams face? Then, how smart recruiters solve this problem. Finally, implementation. So I'm going to pause here to explain what I mean. Implementation is how we actually implemented the solution that I'm going to share with you. The reason this is important is because often presentations give some great high-level ideas, but don't actually show you how to do it, how to achieve the result that the presenter achieved. And so I'm going to use screenshots and some kind of in-depth explanations, because this is the systems portion, to help you understand how to implement this at your company. If you're not an operations person, and what I left out of my title is I also run revenue operations for Smart Recruiters. So that means sales operations and operations as pertains to sales, marketing, and the finance team. So what I'm going to do is get into some specifics. I am happy if you need help later understanding some of the finer points to answer your questions. Just shoot me an email. And then results. We're not going to dig deep. I'm not going to be sharing a lot of benchmark data, though I'm happy to share outside of this. When I say results, it's going to be more high-level stuff. So a few ways that this new solution has impacted our productivity and the team on a personnel level as well. So let's jump right in. What is the number one problem for SDR teams? A lot of leaders will have different answers for this, but mine is pretty simple. It's time spent on non-selling activities. And so I would define non-selling activities as anything that doesn't involve talking to prospects or sending emails to prospects. So this includes finding contact data, researching accounts, finding phone data. This is a huge one. Finding email addresses. This is actually where, in the past, I've watched my teams waste a lot of time trying to find accurate email addresses. And then personalizing outreach. What I mean by this is writing custom inserts for emails, or coming up with interesting things to say to prospects over the phone when they do pick up. So these are four of hundreds of examples of things that SDR teams generally do that are non-selling activities and probably should be handled by someone other than the SDR. I want to speak a little more about this because this is something that's pretty close to my heart, and it's because I got my start as an account executive with a company called Lead Genius. And so, as some of you may know, Lead Genius, one of the things they do is sell custom prospect data to sales teams. And so this felt like a no-brainer to me. But to a lot of VPs of sales, it really wasn't, because their feeling was, my SDR team is here 8 hours a day. I pay their base. I really only pay them more if they get results. So I'm just going to use them to do the research. Why would I pay someone else to do research when I have an SDR team? And this is a huge miss, and this is where a lot of SDR teams go wrong. What that VP is forgetting is that his or her team is losing productivity, which means there's a huge opportunity cost to the time spent looking for email addresses or finding phone data. And frankly, if there's not a big opportunity cost to wasting your SDR team's time, then you maybe shouldn't have an SDR team. Um, so this is a huge problem, and now let's jump into how we solved it. So the first step is to try to quantify how much time is actually spent on this. Now, over 50% of the day is wasted. That's according to a 2-year-old study that HubSpot wrote a lot of blog posts about, brought a lot of attention to at the time. Frankly, I think this number is low. The reason I think that is because it includes AEs who have uh, oftentimes a much bigger incentive to sort of work around the clock than a poorly motivated SDR team. And maybe poorly incentivized is the better way to put it. But I would guess that a lot of teams spend 60, 70, 80% of their time doing things like finding contact data. And the other thing to keep in mind is any issues with incentives are exacerbated when you give a lot of manual work like this to an SDR. And what I mean is it's really easy to sort of hide behind the fact that I'm doing lead research instead of calling. I'm sure this will hit home with some of you, but a lot of SDRs out there, because they're new to sales, not always because they're lazy or dumb, but because they genuinely don't understand the value of their time. There's a big possibility that they're going to spend a ton of time doing this research, and maybe more than is even necessary, in order to avoid getting on the phone, because phones are scary. Well, this is a good way to sort of force their hand by limiting this non-selling activity, and it helps you find out who's a solid SDR and who's not really quickly. So before we get into the solution, let's talk about what our tech stack is. Frankly, I don't think this is all that important for you to know. It's sort of an obligatory operations or systems slide, but let's go through what we're using just in case it might be meaningful to you as we go. So Marketo and Salesforce are sort of the top of our funnel. It's where they are our source of truths for marketing and sales. When it comes to lead research, we use ZoomInfo, DiscoverOrg, and LinkedIn. We have a few other one-off tools, but these are the 3 big ones that we use. For actually reaching out to prospects, we use Outreach.io, RingCentral, and Chili Piper. I wasn't sure which section to put this in, but Chili Piper is what we use to actually schedule meetings. So it's sending calendar invites on our behalf, which is why I included in the section with Outreach and RingCentral. And then sort of the miscellaneous is Lean Data and Exec Vision. So for those who aren't familiar, Lean Data is a tool that routes leads to the appropriate account. This can be L2A is what they call it, lead to account routing. This can be hugely valuable, especially as your team grows, and the potential for SDRs to step on each other's toes or work a lead that's associated with an account that someone else is outbounding into. That potential grows, so Lean Data helps sort that out. And Exec Vision is a coaching tool. So this is not really a one that I'm going to dive into during this presentation, but just so you know what it is, Exec Vision is one of the tools sort of in the same sandbox as Gong and Chorus. It does recording and helps you deliver coaching for SDRs and AEs on the phone. So there's our tech stack. So let's dive into how smart recruiters solved the problem of SDR spending lots of time doing non-selling activities. It's pretty simple. We consolidated the entire process, meaning the outreach process, specifically the outbound sales process, into one app. So Outreach.io, ZoomInfo, LinkedIn, Sales Navigator, DiscoverOrg, and then all the other account research, all the little tools associated with it. We pushed all of them into Salesforce. So consolidated them into a single UI, so a rep never needs to leave Salesforce to do their job. At least in theory. While it doesn't always work out that way, we find that reps can do 95% of their job on one page, which is a huge time saver. So let's start with what we see as the ideal day for an SDR at Smart Recruiters. So in the morning, 7 a.m. to 11 a.m., replace these with hours that are appropriate for your time zone. But morning is spent in outreach in a single UI, and it's call tasks and email responses. We're talking to people during these hours. If we were East Coast, we may switch these or have midday be calling hours. But because we're West Coast, people start getting in between 5 and 8 a.m., depending on what time zone they serve, and they get right to calling. And then in the afternoons, we're actually doing our research, our account activation, contact activation, miscellaneous tasks. We do all of this in Salesforce. And before I move on, you're going to see account activation and contact activation a few more times. So these are actually important for you to know and understand the definition of. An account is activated when an SDR or an AE has checked a box that essentially says, this is my account. I believe we even label it like target account. And the account is activated once that's checked and one contact has been sequenced, or you're reaching out to one contact. So that company is now activated. An account, or rather a contact, is activated once that person is marked as a target, just like the account, and you have logged at least 2 activities against the contact. And the reason we do 2 is pretty simple. If the threshold were 1 activity, it would create a problem for us, because if the email bounces, the first email you send bounces, it's a dead contact, but it's counted as activated unless we require at least 2 activities, in which case the chances of artificially inflating your number of activated contacts is much lower. And so this is an important metric for us, because without knowing how many contacts and accounts have been activated by the team and by each individual rep, which we can track in reporting pretty easily, now that we've sort of built this infrastructure, without knowing that, we have no idea how wide a net we're casting. We don't know how many accounts the average rep is working at a time, things like that. So now we can, on a single dashboard, see exactly the number of companies and the number of people on average within those companies that we're talking to. And this really helps us avoid a situation like we had, frankly, when I started at Smart Recruiters, where we're prospecting a mile wide and an inch deep. Tons of companies and very few people within each company. Okay, so now that you understand the definition of activation, let's move on and continue with how we solve this. So the goals of this project were twofold. 1, to allow an SDR to do all non-selling activities inside of Salesforce. So specifically what we mean is all the administrative tasks in one screen. And then 2, outsource as much of the low-value activities as possible to a less expensive team. We actually have a combination of interns and overseas people who just do data work. It's a huge cost savings relative to SDRs before you factor in the opportunity cost of them spending time doing this stuff. And when people specialize, we end up with something like an assembly line that allows us to have good data in Salesforce at scale pretty quickly, which is way better than what any one SDR can do with their target account list. An implementation, pretty simple. Consolidating all of the different apps that SDRs generally spend their day bouncing back and forth between into a single screen. And account enrichment, and that's the process of having people outside of the SDR team helping with a lot of the lower value or the easier to automate tasks. And so, step 1 is the consolidation portion. So what we're looking at here is the account screen. This is a screenshot of a real account inside of our Salesforce instance. And I want you to notice a few things. The first is the layout. Within this layout, you're going to see a bunch of company-specific merge fields. And when I say merge fields, I mean they are pieces of information that are mapped to fields inside of our email automation tool. In our case, it's outreach.io, but there are others out there that have similar functionality. So we're actually pushing data from this screen into our email automation tool. And the layout, we tried to have a common sense arrangement. So basic info about the account, and then below that, fields required to activate. You remember talking about activation. These things all have to be filled in for you to get credit as having activated this account in dashboards. And if the dashboards don't reflect that you've activated this account, then it didn't happen. Then the try to fill in when possible. I named it that intentionally because these are things that you can't always get, but are really valuable to have in Salesforce. And we have some KPIs around how many of these fields are filled in and things that managers are actually held to. And then important company info is sort of at a glance. This is all the stuff you might need to know about the company as you're deciding whether to prospect into them, or while you're prospecting, things you might need to know about them. Next, normalized. You'll see normalized a few times in the account and contact layout. What this means is we literally retype an existing value in plain English. And the last thing you want is, if you're reaching out to me, for your email to say, hey, Taft, I was researching smart recruiters, LLC, period, and blah, blah, blah. Nothing screams automated, lazy email like a piece of data that hasn't been cleaned or checked by a human. So anything like that, first name, last name, company name, stuff like that is rewritten by the SDR or by someone doing the data work in plain English. And then here we have company-specific notes housed on the account object, and we'll get it more into why this is important. This is important later. All right, so continuing, step one is the contact information. This is where SDRs spend the bulk of their day. And so, again, prospect-specific merge fields housed on the contact object. I want you to look at the middle of the screen on the right-hand side. You'll see OB Custom, OB Custom 1 and OB Custom 2. These are really important because often companies will merge the basics, first name, last name, company name, basic information that's already in Salesforce. They'll merge this into their Outreach or SalesLoft or whatever email automation tool they use. But we decided, why should we leave Salesforce to do that? So let's create fields where you can type in the intro sentence, or in our case, it's the intro or the PS. You can choose to do one, both, or in some cases, neither of these. And so while you're doing the research, while it's fresh on your mind, you can type in the opening line or the PS that will be merged tomorrow when the first email is sent after you activate the prospect. So basic info is again in normalized fields here, which is important. And finally, look at the very bottom. You see step 2 is choose and launch sequence. So OB here is short for outbound. So wherever you see OB, know that that's short for outbound. So outbound outreach sequence. So you choose the sequence, and all of the sequences that we have live, we might have one that's specific to vice presidents of talent acquisition, or another one that's specific to some other group within the company. So you can pick your sequence, and then to the right of that, you're going to see OB launch sequence. This is important, and I put a star here because now we're going to get into some of the heavier operation stuff, and this visual might help you follow along and understand what I'm doing to trigger to make Salesforce trigger all of the necessary actions in Outreach or whatever your tool is, so that you can actually activate from within Salesforce. So next, we're looking at field mappings. So I took out logos here, but so in case you're also on Outreach, this is outreach.io, and you're going to see that all of our commonly used merge fields will be filled by Salesforce and are mapped to corresponding fields in Outreach. And then whenever we make changes in Salesforce, those updates are automatically reflected in Outreach within a few minutes. And then look here, you'll see the star again. So OB launch sequence, which we saw is a checkbox on the previous screen that an SDR checks once they're ready to push this person into a sequence, is mapped to launch custom 11. So each custom field in Outreach has a number, and then the text before it is whatever you named that custom field. So we just named it launch. So OB launch sequence is matched with launch custom 11. And now we've seen the field mappings. Now we're looking at triggers. Triggers are important because you essentially teach outreach. And again, this exists in SalesLoft and LiveHive and all the other similar tools out there. Launch is mapped here to the trigger. And what the trigger does is allows you to say if a certain set of criteria are met, then take an action. So the action associated with this trigger is to launch a referral ask sequence. So that's just the name of a sequence. That the name itself is irrelevant. But if custom 11 is true and custom 10, which is where we chose on the drop down the name of the sequence we want to use, is referral ask, then below, you can't see it in the screen, but if you were able to scroll, you would see the action corresponding to these conditions is sequence the prospect in referral ask. So there we go. Hopefully the star has sort of helped you follow along and understand what I'm doing, but I'm happy to put together sort of a more in-depth video and explain it more a bit more if you're interested. Email me about that. Then step 2, we're low on time, so I'm going to hurry through these. But step 2 is request enrichment. The only thing you need to remember from this screen is that we created a button. It's called request enrichment, and this is legitimately the most powerful button in our Salesforce instance. Silly as it may seem, it's a huge deal. So when an SDR and AE clicks request enrichment, these things happen. It goes to 4 different groups. The first is contact enrichment. These are overseas contractors. We actually have one person who does all the contact enrichment. So they have access to ZoomInfo, just like SDRs, they have access to DiscoverOrg, and they are pulling data out of our various sources of data and creating contacts within that account. So we're enriching the account with new contacts. Account cleaning is just like the contact enrichment. Now they're going through and making sure that all of the data we have in the account, the important data, is up to date. For example, the ATS that they're using. The contractor literally goes to every website and checks their ATS and makes sure that the info we have is correct and complete. Business insights, we actually go to a team of interns who scour the web, and I'll show you a little more about what that means in a second. And then custom content. Again, I have a slide dedicated to this. So, contact enrichment, as I've mentioned, we go through DiscoverOrg, ZoomInfo, Kickfire, LinkedIn, Prospect, and gather all of the relevant contacts according to a set of profiles we've made for the contractor. We're saying put, the CHRO and the VP of Talent Acquisition and one of each of the following, 5 titles or whatever into the account. And so make sure the SDR has someone to reach out to when the enrichment is complete. Account cleaning, similar. As I mentioned, the current ATS, and what I didn't mention before is things like billing address, which is how our territories are mapped. So it's really important to us. An employee count, which is how we segment our clients, also very important to us. Make sure they're accurate and complete. Business insights has been hugely valuable. So we scour the web. It's a team of US interns who are business students who are thoughtful and intelligent and are good at finding insights that are valuable for an SDR to leverage whenever someone picks up the phone or when they're writing emails. So company website, Google searches, news, press releases, and one that's actually been really helpful for us is 10Ks and 10Qs. So these are publicly available documents that have to be filed with the SEC by every publicly traded company in the US. So one of the sections is risks. So we literally go to the risk section, Command F, and search for anything related to talent, hiring, jobs, employees, talent acquisition, talent, things like that, and look for anything in their risks that we can call out on a call and say, hey, I was reading your 10K, which is impressive to an executive, by the way, for an SDR to lead with, and notice that you are having issues losing the talent war to Google. We can help. Then finally, custom content. I'm going to breeze over this because this isn't something I'm going to share in a public forum, but basically we create custom content for every single company we prospect into. And so we've created a process for doing this efficiently and quickly, but just know that if you have the ability to create a custom piece of content for the people you're reaching out to, find a way to operationalize it and include it in your account enrichment. We've seen a huge spike in our response rates and a corresponding spike in our success rates. And so yeah, worth leveraging if you can. And then we have about 2 minutes left, so I'm going to hurry through the results. Again, these are high-level results, but we've seen a huge increase in the number of contacts activated per account. So just by tracking the number of contacts and accounts and the ratio thereof that we're reaching out to, we've seen that we need to be activating more contacts per account. And so through coaching, we've more than doubled. Through coaching and operationalizing this whole system, we've more than doubled the number of contacts per account that we talk to, which has led to some real successes in terms of getting more opportunities per account activated. We've also seen a big increase in dials. This is for 2 reasons. One is because we have a dedicated time for calling that's ready as soon as reps get in the morning. And the second is because reps are spending less time trying to find all of this contact information and more time just contacting people. And then a 15% increase in calling success. I think this is a combination of things, but one is the more calls they make, the better they get. Another is these business insights are really helpful and a great way for an SDR or an AE to automatically have something valuable to say as soon as they pick up the phone. And just better training all along. So lots of things have led to that. Then anecdotal, and these are really important. So just because I don't have numbers to apply to these, don't think they're not important. And a little bragging on behalf of my managers. I have 2 excellent managers who leverage this system and deliver great training and keep our SDR team happy. We've had no voluntary turnover. No voluntary turnover in almost 18 months now, since I took over and hired these guys. They've done an amazing job, and part of it's because the team feels more productive, they're wasting less time, there's less frustration around contact data. If you're researching your own contacts, one bounce can be heartbreaking. If you spent the last half hour scouring the internet for some VP's phone number and then you send her an email and it bounces, that's painful. And then finally, this is maybe the most important one, because of this assembly line, because SDRs are spending time selling and not researching and trying to find contact data, their position has really been up-leveled. They're creating more value for the company and they feel more important. So I am almost over time, folks, so I'm gonna hurry up and end. But again, this has been eliminating non-selling time for top SDR teams. My name's Taft Love. I'm the Global Director of Sales Development for Smart Recruiters, and you can reach me at t.love@smartrecruiters.com.